All right, we'll get started. Just because this is a long presentation, but I'm going to try to keep it within the time, even though some of the fellow presenters did keep theirs very quick. Just a poll in the room. Are there any like OTs, clinicians, physios, clinical educators, people that take students? Okay, so hopefully the content here will call out to you guys from your own experiences. My name is Richard Kellowan. I'm an OT from Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and this is my presentation today, Blueprints for Success, Senior Perspectives on Enabling Leadership for Pressure Injury Programs during their clinical fieldwork. This is one of two projects that I'm presenting at the ISS. The second is a poster which examines preceptor perspectives, and that's currently on display downstairs. If you have any questions about either presentation, just flag me down. I'm here for the entire presentation. And of note, I have a very thick binder there, which is going to put me over my carry-on weight capacity going back. But that's all the projects that are listed. In case you have any questions, you want to rifle through it, feel free to you can look through it during the presentation or thereafter. So a little bit of information on me. I'm not going to go through all the slides here, but I am a Canadian OT. Most of my work when I present at conferences focuses on clinical issues, clinical dilemmas, teaching, or how to strive for clinical excellence, knowing I usually ask questions that strike me personally. How can I do my job better? How can I make better students? How can I make better patient care? Today's work has actually been recognized by my employer, Kingston Health Sciences Center, for the Teams Award under the Knowledge category. That was a competition that was vetted by the board of directors. So I'm very proud today to showcase that work on behalf of myself and my students. And the last statement discloses that there are no conflicts of interest with this presentation. So a bit of an introduction. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard about the terminology here, but LEAP placements is a term to describe within occupational therapy fieldwork. It has evolved, particularly over the last decade, to include non-traditional fieldwork placements that focus on leadership, emerging advocacy, and program development roles. Between October of 2021 and August 2022, KGH completed a series of 5 projects to advance OT roles for pressure injury management through LEAP placements. 5 students completed 5 projects across a variety of clinical, community development, and hybrid placements, including 2 students who completed 2 separate placements or hybrid placements with me. Placements range from 4 to 8 weeks with all levels of fieldwork students, introductory, intermediate, and final level. There is 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 supervision models with me as the primary and sole supervisor. The projects listed below, as I mentioned, are in that big binder there, if you're brave and you want to look through it, and they're also going to be summarized in a couple slides to follow. Student outcomes from these projects centered on them learning practice knowledge, clinical skills, and also how to develop programs and policies centering on pressure injury management. Now, these outcomes are highly dependent on how well they performed as student leaders, how well I performed as a supervisor, and of course, their learning. So speaking as a clinician first, a clinical instructor second, and sort of a quote, researcher dead last, I found that there was limited research to guide me as a clinician and a clinical instructor on how to guide students, how they might learn and perform during leadership placements, and how to best supervise them, knowing that these gaps could ultimately influence the quality of the placement and its outcomes. So this led me to explore student perspectives, and how to best supervise LEAP placements, specifically how to build my preceptor skill set to enable student performance and progress them from learners to professionals, and to enhance future LEAP placements. Now, in terms of disclosure, I have high level expectations for my students and for myself. I'm a lifelong learner. I try to act as a change agent. I try to advocate for OT and champion for change, champion for patient outcomes. So my expectations can be really high, and that will be something that'll come out in a little bit in some of the following slides. So the next 5 slides are abstracts of each project. I don't know if you can read them, but hopefully you can. And again, the binder does have a little bit more detail there. Each project was extensive with protected and personal time required of the students, both with on-site and remote work schedules. The first project listed here was a literature review of 54 articles, a clinical observation of wound care professionals, and knowledge dissemination of best practices for wound prevalence surveys in an acute care setting. Results validated our current practices at KGH somewhat, identified gaps, and also identified 11 recommendations justifying formally including OTs on wound prevalence survey teams. The second project was an advocacy paper, optimizing occupational therapist roles within acute care. It highlighted on a critical literature review of 30 articles, 7 case reports of actual patient care within the last 2 to 3 years, and occupational therapy theory to highlight occupational therapy roles. Again, recommendations focus on how to optimize role performance for OTs, and with suggestions of protected roles for only us to do seating prescriptions, and also for protected referral pathways for OTs to get involved for any pressure injury occurrence. The third project developed a best practice guide for heel offload, and that was validated by hospital clinicians. It was delivered in online and print formats and providing learners with practice knowledge, research, and clinical utility factors surrounding heel pressure injuries and their offloading interventions. The fourth project was a sister project done at the same time. It surveyed key stakeholders in the hospital, i.e. clinicians, on the clinical utility of various TL offloading devices. An online survey and follow-up interviews determined specific indicators of clinical utility for these devices, rollout factors, and practically it identified which devices should be purchased by hospital for trial with patients. The last project was pretty much decision trees. It was sort of the end of the train for these projects. It built on all the previous projects, and it basically came up with very concrete referral processes for us in terms of how to streamline OT referrals from ward staff, how to help OTs with their screening processes for foot drop and offloading to determine if it was actually present or needed, and also selection device tree for individual devices. And again, validation occurred through an online panel of OTs. So towards the end of this series of projects, the blueprint for success model was something that I conceptualized following feedback from students and my own critical reflection. The model compares LEAP project supervision to building a house where the preceptors and students act as co-architects to design, build, and showcase the final structure. So there's 5 themes listed below, which are draw up the plans, build my clinical foundation, scaffold my growth, set the roof within reach, and hold an open house. So using an email survey, all the students were purposely selected to provide feedback on their experiences, with the first 2 questions focusing on the value and reasonability of the projects and the LEAP placements. The secondary questions examined whether each theme represented the learning experiences. So to break each theme down, I'm going to go into them a little bit more now. Drawing up the plans reviewed whether pre-placement activities, such as a welcome meeting, having precept objectives, defined research questions by the preceptor, and weekly timelines and structure devised by the preceptor were helpful. Student input on whether projects were designed to meet their workload capacities at that point in their training, their interests, their learning needs, and whether the process was based on negotiation and co-creation, i.e. a two-way street. Building my clinical foundation examined whether these LEAP placements provided students with actual practice knowledge and clinical reasoning skills, whether supervision strategies fostered their clinical skills development, and whether student and preceptor strategies enabled their own learning. Ultimately, students were asked, were these projects worth it for them personally? Scaffolding my growth focused on how to grow them, to grow their communication skills, conceptualization skills, and interdisciplinary teamwork skills. Key examples included having shadowing and clinical learning experiences that paralleled what they were reading and what they were developing, one-to-one meetings with leadership and executives to discuss project outcomes and implementation, and side discussions where I might talk about my clinical realities and previous dilemmas and struggles and success stories to sort of contextualize the care. Setting the roof examined if preceptor expectations were high, if they were reasonable, and if work sharing, such as handing the baton to incoming students, were effective. Single and co-student learning models were also examined. Holding an open house reflected on how the preceptor supported knowledge dissemination, the value of written and PowerPoint presentations, online and in-person platforms to present their information. And again, reflective questions explored the student comfort with engaging executives and professional practice leaders for their work. Given this study had occurred after the students had completed the projects, measures were taken to maintain psychological safety and collegial relationships, focusing on voluntary, honest, and heartfelt responses. Timelines, modes, and means of feedback were negotiable. And as appropriate, if I emailed them or talked with them on the phone or met with them, I used their feedback as well. 4 of the 5 students responded, an 80% response rate, which is pretty good given the small sample size. And as some of the students were still in school and or entering practice with understandable academic, personal, and professional schedules. Results were felt to be genuine, honest, and objective because most of the students contacted me several times after when I was doing this project to sort of talk about the project and relay the project and review the slides. Given I'm a clinician working on the project on my own, there was no formal data analysis in terms of, like thematic analysis or anything like that. Now, overall, the students felt that the LEAP projects had value for clinical reasoning, practice knowledge, communication, professional interactions. They felt it developed critical thinking skills that they could take forward into practice in a professional manner. They felt that reviewing the research critically with an OT lens within a defined time limit also prepared them for entry to practice. They also learned more about pressure injury management that could be taught in school, including the impact of pressure injuries on the patient experience. And preceptor feedback on the professional interactions throughout this process also facilitated their personal and professional development. In terms of reasonability, student responses varied depending on whether the project size and the placement were compatible. Process factors for student performance included having broad examinations with focused and specific deep dives, being able to speak up and advocate to focus on achievable goals within their timelines, having the preceptor listen to this and only give feedback that was in concrete chunks rather than overwhelming amounts of feedback that was hard to digest. In-person communication was best rather than telephone or Zoom meetings, and building honest and genuine rapport was key for students. It allowed for honest and two-way conversation. It gave them an active voice and it made them feel like equal partners, which respected their autonomy and also heard their need for work-life balance. Now, in terms of getting into the individual themes here, so for drawing up the plans, the students felt that having preset the plans, where the preceptor says, this is the plan, let's have you follow it, let's work about it. In terms of objectives, presentation formats were helpful. It gave them a starting point so they could understand the quality of work and the idea of expectations. Otherwise, it would have been overwhelming for them to design and conceptualize the project on their own. Having a preset research question allowed them to be efficient. They could work in a step-by-step plan that consolidated their organization and conceptualization skills. It also allowed them to see the value of the question to me as a preceptor with almost 20 years of experience and how it could benefit them for them as they go through their 20 years. It also let them dive directly into the projects, feeling immersed right away. They did note that longer haul projects might be a little bit more softer if they could help design the project and have more ownership in it. For effective project planning, having a calendar style weekly plan with weekly SMART objectives was best. So they could visualize the project, see what they need to do, work on continuation, and also handing the baton if their goals were not met. Flexibility for change alleviated concerns and pressure over workload and deadline stress. Now, while having preset methods was helpful, it made the projects less student-centered. But the students adapted because, again, they saw the preceptor's vision and they set the responsibility for that preceptor's vision at heart. And they felt they could use the preceptor on his sounding board for any advice or struggles that they were running through. They did, again, speak a lot about collaboration and co-creation when possible, especially when talking about work-life balance. So I always consider student placements to be something like a residency. You come, you do your work, then you got to do some homework. You got to do some work on the weekends because that's what you do as a new grad, at least for OT in Canada, that's what we do. But they did feel the need to negotiate a little bit for that work-life balance and negotiating outcomes over time that could evolve over time. Now, in terms of presenting their work, they found that visual presentations are most effective to share their outcomes visually and to prep the incoming students who might be taking over projects. They felt that extensive written reports were best for high-level stakeholders like our professional practice leaders, our executives, and hospital boards. It also helped visual learners read, write, and digest the reports. Now, in terms of clinical skills development, I wanted to know, do these leadership placements actually give them clinical skills? Now, they felt that, again, reading through previous projects done by previous students helped them sort of come up to pace. Networking with those students also helped them understand my leadership style, my preceptor style, the workflow and work climate at KGH. It allowed them to identify root causes and interventions that they could then carry over into their own step of the project. In terms of self-directed learning, students felt that, it gave them a chance from the theory and the knowledge to actually understand the significance of the project background, while coupling that with hands-on learning facilitated to actually understand and see what they were learning, on books and in paper, and collaborating with professionals for entry into real-life practice. Students noted that, doing a lot of self-directed work also made them up to terms with current terminology, current practice standards, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in terms of learning strategies, students valued ongoing learning for support, having personalized goals so they could meet their individual learning goals, finding meaning in the projects, and being treated as peers. When treated as peers, they felt trusted, respected, and confident. It pushed them to work harder, to strive for more. They did appreciate some of the side stories that I would offer, as it helped them reflect on the content that they were seeing and learning. It helped develop their clinical reasoning. So by narrative reasoning, I could tell you, what was I thinking at that point in time? And we can have a discussion about that. And also promoted critical thinking. Students felt these projects were especially useful if they wanted to work in acute care or in pressure injury management. Now, the final reports were also a practical takeaway that they could list on their job, resumes or interviews, et cetera, et cetera. Now, students also reflected that lead placements are a lot on their own. And if you're trying to do a leadership project within a clinical placement, that's something to consider. But they were thankful that they had these opportunities, especially during the pandemic, where some students actually had no face-to-face fieldwork at all. So in terms of scaffolding growth, again, interprofessional hands-on clinical learning were key experiences so they could see best practices put into practice, including things they could not learn in school and things that would be required to prevent poor patient outcomes. Students learned a lot just from being on the wards and connecting with staff during shadowing. Networking was extremely valuable because they could see and learn different styles from different professionals, and then that would help them develop their own. And again, any extracurricular learning add-ons were also valued. In terms of one-to-one meetings with leadership, whether it's a practice leader or executives, those are very helpful for them to structure the project to the people that would ultimately make decisions. It was practical for them to meet with those people, previous students, and to then sort of mold their step of the project into what it should be. By meeting with executives, the students felt that they had a powerful voice and allowed the project to evolve and to provide a message to the audience that would be heard. Students felt that they were valued on personal and professional levels, and again, that motivated them to work to the highest quality that they could. Again, getting back to these side discussions of clinical experiences, dilemmas, success and struggle stories, they felt that they did give them more practical examples that they may not yet have had, given they could have been halfway through their OT school. And it also supplemented their learning rather than just relying on literature reviews. It helped them as well with the social professionalization of sorts, learning about roles, role conflict, and conflict resolution. For expectation management, students highlighted the need for protected time to meet the project goals, for preceptors to decide on the scope and realism of the projects, not to cram everything that they could think of into like 4 weeks or 8 weeks. And they put the onus on the preceptor to decide whether the placement would be appropriate for the project would be appropriate for a clinical placement or full-time leadership placement. In other words, the preceptor needs to tailor the project to what the students can provide and offer based on their time at the site, their level of training. As a takeaway, students noted that my expectations were very high, but that put a focus on producing high quality work. In reflection, higher level projects should probably be assigned to dedicated leadership projects, to higher level students, and to two students working together as pairs. For some of the entry level students that were given high level projects, it was a struggle. They pulled it off, but it was a struggle. The students did feel that the preceptor had confidence in their abilities, hence that's why high goals were set for them. And again, they mentioned that the goals should be tailored to their level of training because their training may not match a preceptor with about 20 years of experience. Now, they also said that using the first week to discuss, strengths, objectives, goals, workload, building rapport, discussing learning styles would help the preceptor understand where they were coming into at this step in the project. And again, that focused a lot on collaborative learning. So in terms of handing the baton to inpatient to other students, that was effective for projects with shorter timelines and allowed the students to focus on quality rather than quantity. It also promoted communication between different students who might be in the same class or different classes. And it reassured students that if they didn't finish their work, they could hand the baton on to somebody else who would finish the work for them. Now, in terms of their step in the project, students really like the idea of owning the project and being able to do with it what they could do. Conversely, solo projects where they were working on their own, students needed more support. Now, in terms of showcasing outcomes, all students felt that Google Docs or another shared work platform was helpful for continuous input, editing, and auto-saving. Written reports were helpful to share that information to higher audiences and having a finished product to share. Verbal presentations were helpful for students to summarize their work. Opinions were mixed on the value to audiences, however. Some felt that verbal presentations were easier to digest and could be a warm-up for those looking at the written reports later on. And students valued both formats as they felt they improved their communication skills overall. In terms of online presentations, they were best for sharing knowledge to larger audiences, to prevent people to come and leave the online platforms, and to maintain COVID-19 social distancing protocols. Watching earlier recorded presentations from previous students or attending later student presentations, again, allowed for continuity so students could see how their work evolved. And students value the preceptors' efforts to showcase their work at all levels, whether it was local, national, or international conferences. They also felt that having an executive audience during and after the project was helpful, again, to raise the profile of occupational therapy. So I know I'm going to be towards the end of my formal time here, but here are some key findings. Is pretty much what I just said. You guys could pretty much skim through it on your own there. And as you can see, a lot of the key themes between the questions and the themes all sort of merged. The questions overlapped, the themes overlapped. So stepping back to my reflective questions on effective supervision and enabling student performance and improving leadership project design, I did review the literature. I found a couple things. They do align well with my impressions on the Blueprint for Success model. So first, for LEAP projects that may lack daily clinical skills and traditional field work experiences, it's important for preceptors to choose the appropriate leadership style. So the considerate OT leadership and the spirited leadership are two models that I think we can all resonate with. If you step into a leadership role, you probably have these traits already, but knowing about them makes them more visible when you are being a preceptor. Now, in Canada, we have new standards for occupational therapy that just came out last year. They're known as the Collaborative Relationship-Focused Occupational Therapy Principles by Egan and Gestal. I'm just cracking into that, but reflecting on what I know of those standards, there's a couple things I'd like to declare. One, it's important for me to recognize my positionality as a preceptor and the relevance of context and power when negotiating goals with students to make sure that students feel like equal participants, to promote inclusive learning and performance conditions for both individuals and learning pairs by being aware of the nuances of how they and we work together, striving for safety by being aware of how intersectionality, real-life factors, academic versus personal factors, and other things may affect the student's performance. Promoting student self-determination by being aware and sensitive to how they learn and their learning conditions, and also helping students to recognize and apply their strengths, learning, and resources. And above all, integrating all of those things to show a holistic approach to work-life balance. In terms of critical reflexivity, it's important for preceptors to know that LEAP placements can be very unidirectional and influenced by the preceptors. So we have to be open and aware of power dynamics without placating our students or placating our preceptors. It requires us to be inherently responsible for project outcomes and the student experiences because we are the regulated healthcare professionals that are held to ethical practices. And again, it highlights the need to be consciously aware of positionality, open dialogue, willingness to change, to challenge, to be changed, to challenge, to be challenged, and also to change. In terms of student performance, the many themes emerge from progressing learners towards professionals and peers. One, a preceptor who applies OT principles and adult learning to supervision and monitors for student stress, is flexible to adapt and monitors motivation, becomes a therapeutic architect who builds a project in a professionally safe manner. Executive exposure is essential to prepare students for the who, what, when, how, and why of engaging decision makers. Building in practice allows skills for reflection, entry to practice, and consolidation. And having all boots on deck requires the preceptors to be an active participant, to be hands-on, to be immersed in the project, to demonstrate good work ethic, and to be a role model. And constructing community practice occurs when the preceptors respect boundaries, engage students to the fullest, provide them with the feedback on their own feedback, and again, involve them in future steps for the placements. Now, in terms of future LEAP placements, my reflections include engaging students throughout all parts of the planning, including when they're finished their placement, so they can help inform future placements. For health outcomes, we should ensure that all leadership projects include a focus on patient perspectives. And regarding OT roles and utilization, teaching students to be critically reflexive and how to apply the things that they're learning when they enter into practice are also outcomes as well. So I know I'm over time, but in closing, next steps for me include rolling out these materials to onboard new staff in the occupational therapy department, influencing how I might supervise future leadership projects, being more conscious in terms of my student supervision, and as well using this own model. Like I might even just share this with students when they come in, new students coming and saying, hey guys, this is the model I'm going to be following. What do you think about it? Chance for me even to reflect further on this process. So I'm just going to finish off now. These are my references. Oops, maybe am I missing a slide? Here it is. And these are my acknowledgements, which include the lovely staff at Kingston General Hospital. And if I'm correct, is April OT month here in the US? I don't know. But when I looked this up, it said April was OT month. So I thought I would throw it on there. So thank you so much for listening to my rapid presentation. And I hope it did share some messages with you guys. Thank you.